The question now is that the amendment be agreed to. I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and may I at the outset take issue with the member for Cunningham who talks of the assistance package for those in the live cattle export industry, which is part of these appropriation bills. It would not have been necessary, the assistance that is, had the Prime Minister in a knee-jerk reaction not shut down the industry in the first place. Nothing will reimburse the people, those hard-working people in Western Australia and the Northern Territory, for what they lost when the Prime Minister made that knee-jerk reaction. Nothing will put the industry back to where it was before this dreadful, stupid decision on the whim of a television program which was dubious at best. No one wants to see animal cruelty, but no one wants to see an entire industry brought to its knees to appease the sensibilities of a noisy minority. One way, the best way to describe the appropriations bills numbers 3 and 4 is money bills to fix up Labor's mess. This is what these bills represent: a request by the government to draw down funds on the public account. The front page heading on the Australian newspaper said it all yesterday: PM losing battle over economy. Yet while the economy falters, businesses close, farmers struggle and regional towns die due to this government's ineptitude, what does Labor do? It ramps up the attack on the coalition in an internet advertisement using selective quotes, more political spin, rather than doing what a government ought to be doing: governing for the good of the nation, the good of its people. How much did that ad cost? Who's paying? Probably hard-working union members whose fees should be spent on something more worthwhile than propaganda. Labor propaganda. This government has failed to ease financial pressures on Australian families. Every day, in every way, this Labor government has let people down and let them down badly. Very badly, Mr Deputy Speaker. It will continue to let people down while ever it ploughs ahead with policies which hit the hip pockets of ordinary, everyday Australians, Mr and Mrs Average. This is a government which continually talks about economic credibility. This is a government which drones on about its jobs record. Labor cannot, however, justify any claim whatsoever to sound economic management. Its fiscal record is poor. Pathetically poor, and the member for Moreton can complain all he likes, but he knows as well as anybody on his side how poor Labor's record is when it comes to handling the economy. As the opposition leader pointed out on the first day of Parliament this year during the matter of public importance debate, Labor inherited $70 billion worth of Commonwealth assets and a $20 billion surplus, yet has produced the 4 biggest deficits in Australia's history. Let me repeat that for the member of Moreton: the 4 biggest deficits in Australia's political history. Yet last September, the same Treasurer who has overseen those 4 deficits was named World's Best Treasurer by Euromoney magazine. What a farce! Even allowing for the downturn of the global financial crisis, which, granted, did sap economic confidence the world over, Labor has failed miserably. Labor inherited a government with no debt. In fact, it actually had, as I said before, $70 billion in net assets. This government's wasteful and reckless spending has now racked up a record debt of $200 billion, and it is paying nearly $20 million a day in interest. The result of this mismanagement is increased taxes, cuts to family benefits and a lack of business and community confidence. This is certainly so in regional Australia. In Senate estimates just yesterday, the government admitted that Kevin Rudd's decision to abolish the Pacific Solution and temporary protection visas has increased costs to taxpayers, with the Department of Immigration and Citizenship's budget blowing out by more than $1 billion a year since Labor was elected. The costs of running the Department of Immigration were $1.6 billion in the last year of the Howard government, and now, under Labor, these have grown to more than $2.7 billion. It is not surprising to learn that the department officials have reported that the key reason for this increase was the growth in costs for managing asylum seekers. Across the entire immigration portfolio, and not including last year's blowout, the increase for the 4 years to 2014-15 is $759 million. This is $559 million, or almost 3 times more than the $197 million the Treasurer and Immigration Minister told taxpayers the bill would be for immigration when they released the mid-year Economic and Fiscal Outlook 2011-12 for this period just last November. How can Labor be so laissez-faire with taxpayers' money to have blown out its estimates in just 2 months by almost $560 million? Now, if, and it is a big if, Labor's immigration policies were working. You can almost be forgiven for saying, oh well, keeping our borders protected is an expensive operation. But when the Howard government left office, there were just 4 illegal boat arrivals, all adults in detention. Just 4 people. As at January 31, 2012, there are 4,783 in detention and 1,600 in the community. Labor policy at its unworkable worst. A government's first priority is to protect its borders, protect its people. Labor has failed to do so and will continue to fail unless the Prime Minister acknowledges the Howard government policies worked and implements the No.3 solution. Labor has also wasted more than $1 million of taxpayers' money, with Department of Climate Change officials revealing the government has paid a consultancy firm to provide public feedback on the carbon tax. Good money, I suppose, if you can get it. This absolute waste of taxpayers' money on market research is almost unbelievable, except that we know how out of touch Labor is with the Australian public. First and foremost, the Prime Minister promised that there would be no carbon tax under the government she led, and therefore it must come as no surprise that the Australian public do not want this tax. There is certainly no need for $1 million to have been spent finding this out. Labor should have listened to the public from the start. But Labor and listening are 2 words which do not belong in the same sentence, unless, of course, the quasi-Prime Minister, Greens leader Senator Bob Brown, is doing the talking and has the ear of Julia Gillard. It is not just the public Labor is not hearing. Labor has also ignored warnings from its own climate experts that Labor's Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute is an unnecessary waste of money. It has been reported that Peter Cook, the recently retired head of the Greenhouse Gas Cooperative Research Centre, said in a 2008 letter to the then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd that the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute was a mistake, unnecessary, and that the money could be saved by building on existing organisations. This is $315 million of taxpayers' money being thrown away against expert advice. This blatant disregard for unnecessary spending only serves to highlight the Labor government's complete vanity project, which has been ignored by every other country and its desire to pat itself or Senator Brown undeservingly on the back. The Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry has also been splashing out on consultants. In particular, $77,627 was spent on consultants to inform the department on how to remove the agricultural sector's aspirations and needs from the department's mission statement. Can you believe that? The department now has a mission statement which is so pathetically politically correct that it does not resonate with the sector it is supposed to protect. This almost $80,000 identity branding exercise has resulted in the department being left with no distinct identity at all. As a country, the identity of which is sculptured from the agricultural sector, to remove this department's identity is like removing who we are as Australians and where we've come from. But this is hardly surprising. A government without a cabinet minister living in regional Australia, real Australia, is a government with no concept of the throb and the pulse of the nation. Regional Australia is the lifeblood of this country. It nurtures the nation, it sustains it, keeps it fed. That being so, the agricultural sector is not even on Labor's radar, unless it's cutbacks, of course. It would seem that a number of departments are having identity issues, with the Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency also shelling out big bucks for consultants to help the department with its brand identity. More tea leaf readers. It is questionable as to why the department is undertaking a new branding exercise, but even more questionable is why the contract, which runs from 30th of November 2011 to 30th of June 2012, is blown out from $41,167.50 to $200,000. It certainly seems highly plausible that this is another Labor backdoor attempt to have the public fund its desperate advertising attempts to sell the unwanted carbon tax, advertising of which the Auditor-General has been highly critical. Spin, spin and more unnecessary spin. The Building the Education Revolution projects are yet another scheme which appeared to be of benefit to schools and students, but in true Labor style has resulted in more waste, more mismanagement, rorting and price gouging. In my electorate of the Riverina, $280,000 was spent on a library for Mangapla Public School, which was completed last year. However, with no enrolments for 2012, the school is in mothballs, and now sitting on the site is $280,000 which could have and should have been utilised elsewhere. Private schools which manage their own BER finances built value-for-money multi-purpose centres and the like using local tradesmen, whereas public schools had to make do with a one-size-fits-all approach with outside contractors and projects with price tags which were unrealistic. Little wonder many people in my electorate refer to the BER as the Builder's Early Retirement. What it did do, however, was widen the gap between private and public schools. Parents of children at public schools drive past big new rinky-dink multi-purpose halls at, for example, Catholic schools and look on with envy, then drop off their kids at their local public school, which has a project which in some cases costs more, yet pales into insignificance by comparison. Maybe that's what Labor wanted. Just like the misnamed Fairer Private Health Insurance Incentives Bill, class warfare by any other name. Labor purports to be robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. They are no Robin Hood, let me assure you. Robin by hoods, more to the point. The BER is yet another example of this government's complete incompetence with finances. The absolute tangle of red tape and bureaucratic waste is highlighted in the government's administration of the set-top box program. Almost a quarter of the $308 million to put to set-top boxes in pensioners' homes was spent on administration. Can you believe that? The Department for Broadband Communication and the Digital Economy received $24.5 million for the extremely vague department costs and to manage the program. Centrelink received $42.2 million to assist in administering the Household Assistance Program. All up, the government is having set-top boxes installed for $350 each. But I made a phone call tonight to Harvey Norman at Wagga Wagga, and they can do the same thing for just $99, $49 for the converter and $50 to have someone go around to the person's house to set it up. Therefore, Harvey Norman can install two for less than the price of one of the government's. In yet another blunder by Labor, taxpayers are still owed millions of dollars from the disastrous $2.5 billion home insulation program, linked to at least 4 deaths and more than 200 house fires, as tragic as that is. As Senator Simon Birmingham stated last year, this was clearly an unmitigated disaster, with the government having ignored countless warnings. The Green Start program, another abandoned Labor scheme, has also left the taxpayer footing a $30 million bill. It's a disgrace. But by abandoning this scheme, Labor had to compensate 10,000 assessors who were left without work or had undertaken training to do a job which no longer existed. Just when it seems that Labor's spending could not get more frivolous, we learn that AusAid has spent more than $110,000 for foreign aid workers to learn, wait for it, martial arts. The justification being it allowed workers to perform duties safely while working abroad. It also appears that Labor has been using taxpayers' money to assist their friends in the unions. Probably no surprises there. In recent federal budgets, Labor has granted $20 million for the unions. In the 2010-11 budget, $10 million was given for a trade union education foundation grant. And in the 2011-12 budget, $10 million was granted for the education resource to membership. This is simply unacceptable. Taxpayers' money should not be handed over so freely to the unions, especially when it appears there is no accountability over the funds being used as directed. Labor is spending money at an unprecedented rate, and its economic malaise is hurting Australia, hurting families, hurting Australian workers. Instead of curbing its spending by cutting back some of the wasteful schemes or the kung fu lessons, Labor is instead passing the cost on to Australian people in the form of taxes, or taking away private health insurance rebates. Labor's mismanagement is costing Australians now and will continue to cost Australians for generations to come. Now, what Labor could do is that it could actually roll out some of the $5.8 billion set aside by the Coalition for water savings infrastructure. So far, this money has been drip-fed to people and irrigation corporations who could really utilise it to make the sort of savings, water savings that is, which could help the environment. We all want a healthy river system. No one wants a healthy river system in the Murray-Darling Basin more than the farmers who help to sustain this nation, who grow the food to feed this nation. Our farmers in Australia are the best in the world, make no mistake. Labor might not recognise that because the Prime Minister doesn't ever mention the word farmer in question time, in matters of public importance, in any of her speeches. Never mentions the word farmer, but they are important, and they need water to be able to grow the food to feed this nation, and more importantly, to feed other nations as well, other nations which don't have the resources, which don't have the wherewithal to grow the food to feed their people. And we have a responsibility there as a nation in the Pacific to be able to do this for them. But so far, only several $million has been spent of this $5.8 billion set aside for valuable water-saving infrastructure, which could be used to help on-farm and off-farm water savings, which could then go into the river system and provide the sort of water that could help the environment, but it's not being done, and Labor needs to roll the money out and needs to roll the money out now. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I thank the honourable member for his contribution.